Welcome on to the show tonight, guys. This is Studio 321. This is your podcast host, Eddie B. So Trump brought in 50 refugees from South Africa, white farmers. He brought them in today to the United States to give them asylum. And of course, the Democrats are going crazy. You know, they're turning it into a racial thing like they do everything else in the world. You know, if you flip over a rock, it's somehow racist, and if you walk outside your front door and you go to the mailbox, that's racist, and everything's racist. To the Democrats, but that's a whole side note. But so, anyways, he brings in 57. I guess we could call them political refugees from South Africa. Now, you would wonder, well, why is there a bunch of white farmers in South Africa anyways? Going back, you really wouldn't know the history. So I'm going to give you a little history breakdown on that. I'm going to take a bunch of history and I'm going to condense it down, to a few minutes so it's not too boring. So you don't have to, watch 4 to 5 hours of video like I do to get this information. So anyways, okay, so why is a lot of South Africa white in the first place? Okay, well, in the 1650s and to 1700, South Africa was settled by the Dutch. Okay, they set up a colony over there to act like a kind of a trading post, halfway point between Denmark and Indonesia. So they put the settlement there. They moved a bunch of colony people there, and then they started to spread out, create farms, create towns, things like that. Now, at that time, they either bought or pushed the black Africans off their land and kind of settled in. So that immediately caused some strife in South Africa. Okay, so that's how it started. Comes the 1800s, they've been there for 50 to 100 years already. Then the British started coming in. So then you had some British white settlers coming down, and those two groups are basically the two main white groups that we have in South Africa today. Now, the Dutch colonizers, they called them Afrikaners. So when you hear the term Afrikaner, those are the Dutch settlers. And then, you also have the other group, which is the English-speaking British settlers that are there as well. And both those groups are there today. Most of them farmers, business people, things like that. Okay, so all of that caused a little bit of strife amongst the people down there because they were taking lands, kicking the black Africans off, and they were just a very aggressive settlements. I mean, they're starting farms and they're doing a lot of stuff. So that did cause some problems. Now, there is I believe it was called the National Land Act of 1913. I'm reading this so that I can get this correct because I've got a lot of information. Okay, that was 1913, and it kicked a lot of the black Africans off their lands, kind of officially is what it did. And that really started heating up the problems between the two. You had more white settlers coming from Britain, and there was also, once they got settled in down there, you had some Greeks and some Italians and some Germans coming as well, coming down there, taking land and basically moving the black Africans off of the lands. And they were kind of getting pushed out into the areas that weren't so nice and stuff like that. So definitely causing problems. Now, fast forward from there, you go to 1948. That's when apartheid begins. That's basically, that's all the official just land grabbing. And apartheid started in 1948. It went till 1994. If you remember the name Nelson Mandela, he was fighting against apartheid, and I think he did 30 years in prison down there. And then he emerged out of prison and became the president of South Africa. But it was definitely a lot of battling going back and forth. During apartheid, there was a lot of violent removal of black Africans from their lands and stuff like that, and it was messy down there. Apartheid was a nasty thing. No, definitely nobody's condoning that because it was not a good time. Okay, so moving on from there. Okay, what you have today, South Africa is run by what's called the African National Congress. Okay, and that's what Nelson Mandela was part of when he was fighting against apartheid. Apartheid ended in 1994. Okay, but Nelson Mandela, then he became president, and then they've moved on forward to today. Well, if you look what's happening right now in South Africa, okay, you've basically got the battle is between the black Africans and the Afrikaners, okay. The Afrikaners, which is again, there was the Dutch settlers. They've been there for 300 years, close to 400 years. So they have history there as well. Obviously, the beginning history wasn't good, but they feel like they have deep roots. They have the majority of farmland in South Africa because they all became farmers. Okay, they become rich, very organized, big farms. I guess the land down there is very fertile. They have good farms. They've become, very, very business oriented down there. So they've ended up with all the money, and the black Africans down there, are impoverished and poor, and how that causes the problems between the two classes. When everybody else has the money and you don't have any, then of course it's going to cause problems between you. Okay, so the new ANC government down there, again, that's the African National Congress. Well, it's not new, but relatively new, we'll call it. They've become very aggressive in the last 10 to 15 years about, they call it, redistribution or whatever you want to call it. Originally, they put some plans to buy farmlands back from the white, farmers, the Afrikaners, and resell it to the black Africans. They just looked at it as land redistribution, we'll call it. Well, it was a very slow process. None of the Afrikaners were selling. It just wasn't satisfying to the population down there, who felt like, they had been wronged in the past, and they wanted this land back. Okay, so and look, it kind of goes back. You see the same type of stuff in every country, right? I mean, we fight about it over here. Slavery is our problem from the past. Nobody's happy about what happened back then, but can you blame white people now? I don't think so. But you do understand the gripes. You really can on both sides. It's the same in Africa, right? They look at it like stolen land, which it was stolen land. But then also the white farmers down there now, they look at it and go, well, I didn't steal it from you. My family's been here 300 years, so it's a battle back and forth, and it's it's just a mess. So, getting back to where we were. So the African National Congress has gotten aggressive in these last so many years on getting land back and either redistributing it or selling it to African black farmers. Okay. Now, I did some research, and I was wondering, because I thought to myself, where does the Chinese tie into this? And I know that sounds a little bit weird, but there's actually a big connection to this. The Chinese government has been supporting the ANC ever since they were formed, and they fought against apartheid, and the Chinese government was backing that up. But the Chinese government now is actually sponsors and trains members of the African National Congress. They have them come to China and they train them over there. So I'm looking at this thinking to myself, because what a lot of people don't know is that China is aggressively colonizing Africa as we speak right now. Okay? I know people like to say, white people are the colonizers and blah, blah, blah. Well, let me tell you something. If you college kids want something to complain about, or go protest about, you should look into this subject, because I'm going to tell you right now, China is buying Africa at a super aggressive rate. I know right now they own 7% of the land in Africa. Okay. And that's a lot. Now you might not think so, but that's a lot of land. You're talking about, probably a couple 100,000 square miles. But anyway, so China is in with the African National Congress, and I believe that they're helping a little bit to push that aggression to get these white farmers out of China. I mean, excuse me, out of Africa, South Africa, because China wants to take over that entire trade. I know they do. They're just so ultra aggressive. I did a previous podcast on this subject. The amount of land in Africa, the fertile farmland there's a lot. They said it could be 25% of the world's fertile farmlands. Not to mention the diamond trades, all the minerals down in Africa. Africa is an untapped resource. It's one of the countries that never really, I don't think you can call it a first world country, or actually continent, to be, because Africa's made up of a bunch of different countries, but the continent is lagging behind in progress. So there's a lot of really untapped resources there that could make other countries super rich. And the Chinese know that, and they've been aggressively pursuing that. So fast forward to today, when Trump brings over 57 of these Afrikaner white farmers. Well, in the last so many years, I'm going to say the last 5 years, it's gotten super dangerous for them over there. They have been randomly attacked, a lot of them murdered, beat up, constant harassment by the black population, trying to get them to leave, and trying to scare them off of their lands. And look, a lot of them don't want to go. A lot of them, again, they have super deep history, family history there, 200-300 years. They're proud people. Again, they've been farming a long time. Farmers are stubborn, man. They don't want to leave, and I don't blame them. Again, they're not the reason that this happened, but they're basically what's being attacked now because of what happened in the past. Okay, so it's getting super dangerous for them over there, and I think it's getting to the point where some of them are ready to leave. Their families. It's one thing when you're worried about yourself, but when you have a wife and kids and grandkids and friends, and you got a lot of people to worry about, sometimes it's better off just to pack up your stuff and go ahead and move somewhere where you don't have to worry about everybody else. Now, there's a ton of videos and stuff out on this. If you're ever on YouTube looking around, just type it in, South African farmer attacks. There's tons of videos. Now, probably what's going to happen now is this stuff's going to start all getting covered up. But there's videos going back 5, 6, 7, 10 years about this exact subject in South Africa. They have self-defense combat courses down there to teach these people to protect themselves, and I was watching one where an Israeli ex-special forces guy opened up a school down there to teach these African farmers how to protect themselves from the attack of these mobs, because now the politics down there, and just like in our country, the politicians have turned everything racial. That's what they're doing. They're turning it into race politics, and they're going to drive out all these white farmers, and they're blaming it on race, But I kind of, not to get on a side subject, but I kind of thought about that whole thing, and I was thinking to myself, because I'm a history buff, it reminds me of the Russian Revolution. I think it was like 1915, when the communists in the cities all got together and decided that all the farmers out in the country were the reason that everybody was hungry, because, again, you got to point the finger at somebody, right? So you pick the people easiest to blame. Well, so they blamed all the farmers, and they put together these mobs, and they went out into the countryside and they murdered all the farmers and kicked them off their land. And, you know, a lot of them, they just destroyed everything they had and burnt down their farms. Well, in hindsight, they didn't realize that the farmers were the best at growing the food. And so after that went on for about a year and a half. And after all of that, 3 million people starved to death in Russia because nobody was making enough food, you know? So I kind of was likening those two together. I kind of wonder, you know what I'm saying? Like, is that going to happen? Because what happens when you kick out all your farmers? You end up with no food. But, you know, hey, that's their politics, whatever they want to do. But anyways, so Trump has let in these 57 refugees. I feel like this is just the beginning. I feel like he's going to open the floodgates. I think that was kind of like the open invitation, and he's going to let these white farmers, you know, come to the United States and restart here. Now, why would the Democrats be mad about that? Because, well, they're supposed to be pro-immigration, right? Well, what you realize, again, is everything they do is racial. Everything. Okay? It's not about human rights or this. It's all based on race. And they can't help themselves. Okay? They don't care if you let a bunch of minorities in, but if you let a bunch of white people in, oh, that's a problem. You see what I'm saying? And it's just disgusting, right? You're supposed to help everybody. Like, we can't help the world. We know that. We have to limit immigration anyways. But when he brings it just a few, think about it. 57 of them, the Democrats go crazy. And it's sickening. Joe Biden just let in 12 million over the southern border. And to be honest, not to pick on anybody, but most of those people were uneducated people. The people that Trump just brought over are pretty much all educated people. And again, that doesn't make it any more humanitarian or any less humanitarian. But the point is, the Democrats turn everything into race. Everything. And it's just sickening. I get tired of it, but that's the playbook, man. That's the way they roll. But yeah, so anyways, it's going to be very interesting to watch this play out over the next year. I got a feeling that there's going to be a lot more of these refugees coming from South Africa, and it's going to create, you know, a bunch of problems with the Dems, but, you know, whatever. And we'll see what happens in South Africa. I know that our government has been trying to put pressure on them to stop all these attacks, and what they're doing is they're basically acting like it's not happening, but it is happening. You know, it's happening a lot more now than ever before. And like I said, this isn't new. You can go back and look at videos for 10 years online about the white South African farmers being attacked, you know, by the black Africans and all the racial problems it's created down there because of the politicians. And, you know, again, that's the same thing they're doing in our country. But anyways, guys, I hope you liked my video. I hope you learned a little something from it. This is Eddie from Studio 321. I'll talk to you soon. Good night, guys.